Her cousins got millions. She got a condemned workshop and a note that changed everything. If this story already feels familiar, like a chapter from your own life where things just don't seem fair, you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button because we're going to get through this together. The office of Mr. Davies smelled of old paper and furniture polish, a scent I'd come to associate with finality. It was the third time I'd been there. The first was 2 weeks ago, a blur of formal condolences after I was informed of my grandfather's passing. The second was to sign papers I didn't understand, a social worker named Carol sitting beside me, her presence a heavy, institutional blanket. Today was the third and final visit. Today was my 18th birthday, the day I aged out of the state's care and into this. A stiff chair in a quiet room, a man in a suit on the other side of a sprawling mahogany desk, and the rest of my life balanced on the head of a pin. Mr. Davies cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. He adjusted his spectacles, his gaze sympathetic but distant, the way a doctor looks at a particularly unfortunate X-ray. "Maya," he began, his voice calm and measured. "As you know, today is your 18th birthday. On behalf of my firm, and personally, I wish you the best on this milestone." I nodded, my hands clenched in the lap of my thin jacket. The jacket, like everything else I wore, was courtesy of the last group home. It was clean, functional, and utterly devoid of personality. A uniform for the unwanted. "We are here to execute the final directives of your grandfather, Thomas Sterling's, last will and testament," he continued, shuffling a small stack of papers. "It's straightforward, for the most part." The "for the most part" hung in the air like dust in a sunbeam. I knew what was coming. I'd been briefed by Carol, who'd tried to soften the blow with phrases like, "disappointing, but not personal," and "we have resources to help you transition." I knew about my cousins, Daniel and Claire, children of my grandfather's other son, my uncle, a man I'd met only once at a strained holiday gathering when I was 5. They were family in the biological sense, but strangers in every other. Your grandfather's primary estate, including his investment portfolio, savings, and the sale of his residential property in the city, has been liquidated as per his instructions, Mr. Davies said, his eyes fixed on the document. The total value, after taxes and fees, is approximately $3.4 million. I felt a hollow space open up in my chest. It wasn't a surprise, but hearing the number out loud gave it a new, crushing weight. $3.4 million. Enough to erase a lifetime of uncertainty, enough to build a future from scratch. "This amount," he went on, oblivious to the sucking void inside me, "is to be divided equally between your cousins, Daniel Sterling and Claire Sterling Patterson." He paused, as if expecting a reaction. I gave him none. My face felt like a stone mask. For 2 years, since my grandfather had been moved into managed care and his memory began to fray, I hadn't heard from him. Before that, his visits had grown sporadic, his calls shorter. I had built a narrative around his silence. He was old. He was tired. He had his own life. The other narrative, the one that whispered to me in the dark of the dormitory, was that he'd forgotten me. That I was a loose end he'd finally snipped clean. This news felt like confirmation of that darker story. "Now," Mr. Davies said, setting aside the main document and picking up a single, worn manila envelope. "We come to the matter of your inheritance, Maya." My heart gave a stupid, hopeful little flutter. Maybe there was a trust. A small educational fund. Something. Anything. A sign that I hadn't been completely written off. He slid the envelope across the polished desk. It stopped a few inches from my hands. It looked thin, insignificant. Next to it, he placed a single, heavy, old-fashioned iron key. It was ornate, with a complex, almost floral head and a long, rust-pitted shaft. "Your grandfather bequeathed to you, and you alone, his property at 114 River Road, in the township of Northwood. The deed is inside this envelope. This is the key. Northwood. The name sparked a faint memory, a flicker of green trees and the smell of cut lumber. A place from a weekend trip so long ago, it felt like someone else's dream. "The property," Mr. Davies said, choosing his words with excruciating care, "is a workshop, a standalone structure on a small parcel of land. I must be very clear with you, Maya. The structure has been officially condemned by the county. It is deemed unsafe for occupancy and is, in its current state, a liability. The county has issued orders for it to be demolished. The back taxes are also significant." He slid another paper toward me, a tax bill with a number in the thousands. Then another, a bright red document with the word "condemned" stamped across the top. I stared at the key, at the thin envelope, a condemned workshop, a pile of debt. This was my inheritance. My grandfather, the man who taught me how to skip stones and identify constellations, had left me a ruin. The hollow space in my chest filled with something hot and sharp. It felt like betrayal. "There is also this," Mr. Davies said softly. He reached into the manila envelope and pulled out a smaller, sealed letter. It was cream-colored, thick, the kind of stationery people don't use anymore. My name was written on the front in a familiar, shaky script. My grandfather's handwriting. He was very specific that you receive this only on your 18th birthday, and only after the terms of the will had been fully disclosed. I picked up the letter. It was heavy, heavier than it should have been. It felt warm, as if he had just been holding it. I looked at Mr. Davies, my carefully constructed mask finally cracking. A single, hot tear escaped and traced a path down my cheek. I wiped it away angrily. "Is that all?" I asked, my voice raspy. He gave a small, sad nod. "That is all. The firm can, of course, assist you in filing the paperwork to relinquish the property to the county to avoid the tax burden. Most people in your position would. Most people in my position." The phrase echoed the language of the system I was finally leaving. A category. A problem to be managed. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. I scooped up the deed, the tax bill, the condemnation notice, and stuffed them into the large manila envelope. I clutched the key in one hand and the sealed letter in the other. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Davies," I said, the words formal and brittle. "Maya," he said, a flicker of genuine concern in his eyes. "If you need anything, advice, my card is in the envelope." I didn't answer. I just walked out of the office, past the sympathetic receptionist, and into the cold afternoon air. The city noise hit me like a physical blow. For 18 years, I had been a ward of the state. I had no family to call, no home to return to. And now, my inheritance was a debt, a ruin, and a letter. A letter that felt like it might be the cruelest part of it all. A final, posthumous explanation for why I was worth nothing. I walked for hours, the key digging into my palm, the letter a cold weight in my pocket. The transitional housing unit they'd placed me in was on the other side of the city, a sterile apartment in a concrete block building with a view of a brick wall. It was a temporary hold, a place to exist for a few weeks while I figured out what came next. The problem was, there was no what next. My plan, a fragile thing woven from hope and desperation, had been to use whatever small amount my grandfather left me to get a real apartment, a real life. That plan had just been turned to ash. Back in the featureless room, I laid everything out on the thin mattress. The official-looking deed, its legalese a foreign language, the angry red of the condemnation notice, the tax bill that might as well have been for $1 million, the heavy iron key, and the letter. I traced my name on the envelope, Maya. His handwriting was just as I remembered it from the birthday cards he'd sent when I was little, before the silence began. Shaky, but deliberate. What could he possibly have to say? An apology? An excuse? A final twist of the knife? I imagined the words inside. "I'm sorry, but your cousins have families, responsibilities. You're young, resilient, you'll be fine. The kind of platitudes adults use to justify their choices. The anger I'd felt in the lawyer's office had cooled into a deep, aching sadness. He had been my only anchor, and he had cut the rope. I spent the night staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the building's ancient refrigerator. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the number, 3.4 million. I saw my cousins, their faces hazy in my memory, living lives of impossible ease. And I saw the workshop, a dark, crumbling shape in my mind, a monument to my own worthlessness. Why a workshop? He was a carpenter, a cabinet maker. His hands were calloused and strong, always smelling faintly of sawdust and varnish. When I was very young, before my mother passed away and I was taken into the system, he'd let me spend time in his city workshop. It was a magical place, a forest of wood and tools. He'd give me scraps and a small hammer, and I'd sit for hours on the floor, building lopsided creations while he worked at his bench, the air filled with the scent of pine and the rhythmic rasp of a hand plane. That workshop had been sold years ago. This one in Northwood must have been something else. A place he went to get away. A place he'd kept hidden. The temptation to just throw it all away, the key, the deed, the letter, was immense. I could call Mr. Davies in the morning, relinquish the property, walk away clean, with nothing but the clothes on my back and the hollow ache in my chest. It would be the sensible thing to do. It would be what everyone expected. But as the first gray light of dawn filtered through the grimy window, another thought began to take root. It was a stubborn, irrational thought. It was the only thing he left me. The only tangible piece of him left in the world. It might be a ruin, but it was my ruin. And there was the letter. It sat on the bed, almost glowing in the dim light. Not knowing what it said felt worse, somehow, than knowing. The suspense was its own kind of torture. I had to know. But I couldn't read it here, in this soulless room that smelled of disinfectant and quiet desperation. If I was going to read his last words, I had to do it there. In the place he had left me. I had to stand in the wreckage he'd bequeathed me and hear him out one last time. The decision settled over me, not with a sense of peace, but with a grim sort of determination. I had a destination. It wasn't a home, not yet, maybe not ever, but it was a place to go. I got up and pulled my worn duffel bag from the closet. It didn't take long to pack. A few sets of clothes, a toothbrush, a worn copy of a book I'd read a dozen times. Everything I owned fit into a single bag. I put the envelope with the documents inside, but the key and the sealed letter I put in my jacket pocket. They felt important. They felt personal. I left the key to the transitional unit on the small kitchen counter. I didn't leave a note. There was no one to write to. I walked out of the building and didn't look back. At the bus station, I used the last of the cash Carol, the social worker, had given me to buy a one-way ticket to a town I could barely remember. Northwood. The name felt like a question. The bus pulled away from the curb, leaving the gray city behind, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving toward something, instead of just running away. The bus ride was a slow unwinding of the world I knew. The concrete and steel of the city gave way to sprawling suburbs, then to flat, anonymous farmland. Mile after mile of highway unspooled in front of us. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window, watching the landscape change. I thought about my grandfather. I tried to conjure a clear image of his face, but it was frustratingly blurry, softened by time and distance. What I remembered most were sensations. The scratchy feel of his wool coat, the low rumble of his voice, the way his large, rough hand would completely envelop mine. He was a man of quiet habits and few words. He never talked about my father, his son. He never talked about my grandmother, who had died before I was born. And he never talked about the rest of the family, my uncle's family, the ones who were now millionaires. Our time together was always simple: a walk in the park, a visit to the museum, a shared meal at a cheap diner. He was a constant, steady presence in the chaos of my early years in the foster care system. And then, slowly, he had faded away. I had told myself it was the illness, the memory loss. But the will felt too deliberate for that. It felt personal. After a few hours, the landscape began to shift again. The flat fields rose into rolling hills, thick with pine and birch trees. The towns we passed through grew smaller, the buildings older. Weather-beaten barns stood silvered and stoic in the afternoon sun. I saw a sign, Northwood, 15 miles. My stomach tightened. The bus driver, a heavy-set man with a kind, tired face, caught my eye in the rearview mirror. "Northwood, huh?" he said, his voice a friendly rumble. "Not many people heading that way these days. You visitin' family?" "Something like that," I managed to say. "It's a quiet town," he offered. "Used to be a big logging hub. Mill shut down 20 years ago. It's pretty, though, if you like trees." I nodded, grateful for the small talk. It made the knot in my stomach loosen just a little. When the bus finally pulled into Northwood, it wasn't so much a station as a single bus stop sign in front of a closed-down general store. The driver opened the door with a hiss of air brakes. "This is you, kid." I grabbed my duffel bag and stepped out. The air was different here. It was crisp and clean, carrying the sharp, resinous scent of pine and the damp smell of earth. The silence was profound, broken only by the chirping of a distant bird and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. The bus pulled away with a groan, leaving me alone on the side of the road. The town was small, just a main street with a handful of storefronts. A diner with a flickering neon sign, a hardware store, a post office, and a lot of empty buildings. It had the feeling of a place that was holding on by a thread. I checked the address on the deed, 114 River Road. I asked the woman behind the counter at the diner for directions. She was older, with kind eyes and a weary smile. She pointed me down a side street. "River Road's about a mile that way," she said, wiping down the counter. "Not much down there anymore, just the old Sterling workshop at the end." My breath caught. "You knew him? Thomas Sterling?" Her expression softened. "Oh, sure, Tom. He kept to himself mostly, but he was a good man. Used to come in for coffee now and then. Haven't seen him in a couple of years. We heard he got sick." She looked at me, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. "You've got his eyes. You must be the granddaughter." The simple statement, the easy connection, sent a pang through my chest. Here, in this forgotten town, I wasn't just a file number. I was Tom Sterling's granddaughter. He passed away," I said, the words feeling heavy and real for the first time. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry to hear that," she said, her sympathy genuine. "He was always so proud of you. Used to have a picture of you up on his workbench." A picture of me. The thought was a small, warm ember in the cold emptiness I'd been carrying. I thanked her for the directions and headed down the street she'd indicated. The road quickly turned from cracked pavement to gravel. The houses grew farther apart, replaced by overgrown lots and thick stands of trees. Finally, at the very end of the road, where the woods closed in and I could hear the gentle murmur of a river nearby, I saw it. It was worse than I had imagined. The workshop stood alone in a clearing, its roof sagging in the middle like a broken spine. The wood of the walls was weathered to a splintery gray, and several windows were boarded over. A large, faded red sign was stapled to the double front doors, the word "condemned" stark against the pale wood. It looked derelict, abandoned, haunted. A cold gust of wind rustled the tall, dead weeds surrounding it. For a moment, I just stood there, my duffel bag on the ground beside me, the sheer hopelessness of it all washing over me. This was it, the grand sum of my grandfather's love, a pile of rotting wood and a mountain of debt. My hand went to my pocket, to the letter. I had come this far. I had to go inside. I walked up the creaking wooden steps to the front door. The iron key felt cold and heavy in my hand. I slid it into the large, rusty lock. It resisted, grating with disuse. I had to put my shoulder into it, turning with all my weight until, with a loud, protesting clunk, the lock gave way. I pulled one of the heavy doors open. It groaned on its hinges, the sound echoing in the profound silence of the building. A wave of air washed over me, thick with the smell of old wood, turpentine, and dust. It was the scent I remembered from his city workshop, but deeper, layered with years of stillness and neglect. I stepped inside, my eyes adjusting to the gloom. Light filtered in through the grimy, intact windows and the gaps in the boarded-over ones, illuminating a cavernous space filled with silent, sleeping machinery. A massive table saw stood in the center, draped in a dusty canvas tarp like a shrouded monument. A drill press, a lathe, a bandsaw, all stood sentinel in the dim light, covered in a fine layer of sawdust and time. Workbenches lined the walls, cluttered with tools, jars of screws and nails, and stacks of wood. On one bench, a half-carved block of cherry wood sat in a vise, the chisel lying beside it as if the craftsman had just stepped away for a moment, not for years. It was a ghost ship, a place frozen in the moment its captain had departed. I walked deeper into the space, my footsteps stirring up clouds of dust that danced in the shafts of light. My fingers brushed against the rough surface of a workbench. I could almost feel the phantom vibration of the saw, hear the phantom echo of his humming. And then I saw it. On the main workbench, next to a collection of well-worn chisels and a pair of spectacles, was a small, silver-plated frame. I picked it up, wiping the dust from the glass with my sleeve. It was a school picture of me from the 3rd grade. I had a gappy, toothless grin and a crooked haircut. I remembered hating that picture. But he had kept it. He had kept it here, on his workbench, where he would see it every day. The woman in the diner was right. The hot tears I'd been fighting back since the lawyer's office finally came. They weren't angry tears this time. They were tears of grief, of confusion, of a profound and aching loss for a man I was only just beginning to realize I never knew at all. I sank down onto a dusty wooden stool, the photograph clutched in my hand, and cried. I cried for the little girl in the picture, for the lonely teenager I had become, and for the old man who, for reasons I couldn't understand, had left me in this beautiful, heartbreaking ruin. When the tears finally subsided, a strange calm settled over me. The workshop no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like a sanctuary. It felt like the only place in the world I was supposed to be. My hand found the letter in my pocket. It was time. I sat on that stool for a long time, the silence of the workshop wrapping around me like a blanket. The dust motes continued their slow, silent ballet in the fading afternoon light. The grief had hollowed me out, but now something else was beginning to fill the space, a deep, quiet curiosity. This place, for all its decay, was not random. The picture frame, the tools laid out just so. It was a space that had been lived in, loved. It held a story, and I was holding the key to that story in my hand. I pulled the thick, cream-colored envelope from my jacket pocket. My name, Maya, in his familiar, now trembling hand. My fingers were unsteady as I broke the seal. The paper inside was thick, high quality, covered in the same script. There were several pages, all densely filled. I took a deep breath, the air tasting of sawdust and secrets, and began to read. My dearest Maya, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are 18. Happy birthday, my brave girl. I know that must sound hollow right now. I know what you have just learned in that lawyer's office. I know that you believe I have left you with nothing but a pile of rotten wood and debt, while your cousins are set for life. I know you must be feeling hurt and angry and abandoned. I need you to believe me when I say that nothing could be further from the truth. Everything I have done, every choice that led you to this moment, to this specific place, was done to protect you. My eyes scanned the words again. To protect you. It was the last thing I expected to read. How was leaving me destitute a form of protection? I have to tell you a story, Maya. A story I should have told you long ago, but I was a coward. It's about your father, my son. I know you don't remember him. You were too young when he died. I told people the story they would accept, that he was reckless, that he died in a car accident. It was a lie. The truth is much uglier. Your father, Michael, was a good man at his core. He had a good heart, but he was weak in a way I never understood until it was too late. He fell in with a bad crowd. Not petty criminals, Maya. These were serious, dangerous men. A loan sharking and development syndicate that was squeezing the life out of small businesses in the city. Your father started as a driver, then an enforcer. He thought it was a way to make quick money, to provide for you and your mother. He was in over his head before he even knew he was wet. I had to stop reading. My head was swimming. An enforcer? My father? I had no memory of him, only a single faded photograph of a smiling young man with my eyes. The story I'd always been told, the one the social workers had on file, was the car accident. It was a neat, tragic, uncomplicated story. This was messy. This was terrifying. I tried to get him out. I begged him. I offered him all the money I had. But he was trapped. He owed them, and he knew things. Things that could put them away for a long time. One of the men he worked for, the man at the top of it all, was a developer. A man who presented himself as a pillar of the community, but who built his empire on broken lives. Remember that name, Maya. His name is Marcus Thorne. Your father decided he was going to go to the police. He gathered evidence, ledgers, recordings, account numbers. He was going to testify. But they found out. The night before he was supposed to meet with a detective, they came for him. The car accident was staged. They killed him, Maya. They murdered my son. The letter trembled in my hands. A cold dread, colder than the air in the workshop, seeped into my bones. This wasn't just a family secret. This was a crime. A conspiracy. My grandfather wasn't just a carpenter. He was the keeper of a truth that had gotten his own son killed. After that, your mother was never the same. She fell into a deep depression, and I couldn't pull her out. When she passed away a year later, there was only you. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my soul, that they would come for you too. Not to harm you, perhaps, but because of what you represented. You were Michael's daughter. You were a loose end. And Marcus Thorne doesn't like loose ends. That's why I had to distance myself. That's why I let you go into the system. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. To see you in those homes, to know you felt alone. It broke my heart every single day. But the system, for all its faults, made you anonymous. It made you a file, a number. It hid you in plain sight. My visits had to be careful, sporadic. I couldn't be seen to be too close to you, or they might start asking questions. They were watching me, Maya, for years, waiting to see if I had what your father had collected. The money your cousins received? That was your grandmother's inheritance. Clean money from her family. Passed through your uncle. It was untouchable, and I made sure the will was ironclad so Thorne's lawyers couldn't come near it. My own money, the money I earned over a lifetime of work, was different. It was tainted. Not because it was illegal, but because it was mine. If I had left it to you, Thorne would have seen it as a sign. He would have assumed it was hush money, or that it was tied to the evidence he's been hunting for all these years. He would have come for you, and he would have taken it, one way or another. Leaving you with this condemned workshop was the only way to leave you something that he would see as worthless, a liability, something he would never, ever look for. I let the pages fall into my lap. My entire world had just been dismantled and rebuilt in the space of 10 minutes. The narrative of my life, a story of abandonment, of being forgotten and discarded, was a lie. It was a shield. Every cold night in a group home, every lonely birthday, every moment I had cursed my grandfather for his silence. It had all been a sacrifice. His sacrifice. He hadn't cut the rope. He had been holding it all along, from a distance, his hands bleeding. The grief returned, but it was different now. It was sharper, purer. It was grief for his pain, for the lonely, terrified vigil he had kept for almost 2 decades. He wasn't a distant old man who forgot me. He was a guardian, a silent protector who had used the system that I hated as a fortress to keep me safe. And now, here I was, sitting in the heart of his final, desperate plan. The workshop wasn't a punishment. It was a message. It was a hiding place. I looked around the shadowed space, at the sleeping tools and half-finished projects. This place wasn't a tomb. It was an armory. I picked up the pages again, my hands steadier now. There was more. It's a strange feeling to have the entire foundation of your life revealed as a lie. A lie told out of love, but a lie nonetheless. For a moment, I just sat there, the letter in my lap, the cold of the workshop seeping into my bones. The story of Maya, the abandoned orphan, was gone. In its place was a new story, one of crime and sacrifice, and a danger that was still, apparently, very real. Marcus Thorne. The name echoed in my mind, a developer, a murderer, and he was still out there. A wave of dizziness washed over me. It was too much. The lawyer's office, the bus ride, the decaying building, and now this. A secret history that sounded like something out of a movie, not the quiet, unremarkable tragedy I had always understood my life to be. My anger at my grandfather had evaporated, replaced by a profound, gut-wrenching sorrow for him. For the lonely years he must have spent, watching me from a distance, living with this terrible secret. I had to get some air. I stumbled towards the big double doors and pushed one open, stepping out into the twilight. The air was cold and sharp, and I took it in huge gulps. The sky was a deep, bruised purple, and the first stars were beginning to appear. The river murmured nearby, a constant, soothing sound. It was beautiful. It was peaceful. It was a world away from the dark story in the letter. And that was the point, wasn't it? He had brought me here, to this quiet, forgotten corner of the world, to escape that darkness. I looked back at the workshop. It didn't look like a ruin anymore. It looked like a fortress. A strange, lopsided, broken-down fortress, but a fortress all the same. He had left me here for a reason. And the letter wasn't finished. I need to take a second here. Because maybe you know this feeling. Maybe you've had a moment where the rug was pulled out from under you, where you found out that a story you told yourself about your past, about your family, was completely wrong. Maybe you discovered that an act you always saw as abandonment was actually an act of protection. It's a lonely, disorienting place to be. It's like learning to walk all over again. If you've ever had a moment like that, a moment that changed your entire history, let me know in the comments. You're not alone in this. This community is for people who understand that the truth is almost always more complicated than it looks. Now let's get back to the letter, because what it said next changed everything. I went back inside, my resolve hardening. I couldn't fall apart now. He had endured 2 decades of this for me. The least I could do was finish his story. I found an old lantern on a shelf, and after a few tries, I managed to light the wick. A warm, flickering glow pushed back the deep shadows, making the workshop feel smaller, more intimate. I sat down on the stool again, the photo of my gap-toothed smile watching me from the workbench, and picked up the last pages of the letter. So, you are here, in my workshop. This place was my sanctuary, Maya. The one place I could feel close to my craft, and close to my memories of you and your father. But it is also more than that. I told you this workshop was your inheritance, and I meant it. But it's not the building itself, it's what's inside it. I could not leave you money, but I could not leave you with nothing. I saved, Maya. For years, I saved every spare dollar I could, in cash. It is not clean money in the eyes of the world because there is no record of it. It is ghost money. But it is yours. It is the start I could never give you openly. But you will have to find it. Go to my main workbench, the one where you found your picture. Now look underneath it. Behind the leg on the right side, against the wall, one of the floorboards is newer than the others. It will be the third one in from the wall. I had to replace it a few years back. It's not nailed down, it's just set in place. You will have to pry it up. My heart started to pound. I took the lantern and moved to the main workbench. The floor was covered in a thick layer of sawdust and wood shavings. I knelt down, my knees cracking in the cold, and began to sweep the debris away with my hands. And there it was, just as he'd said, a single plank of wood, its grain slightly lighter, its color a little warmer than the dark, oil-stained boards around it. It looked perfectly normal. I never would have noticed it. My fingers searched for a grip. There was a small notch on one end, almost invisible. I hooked my fingernails into it and pulled. It was snug, but it moved. I worked it back and forth, my breath held tight in my chest, until it came loose. I lifted the board away and set it on the floor. Beneath it was a dark, square cavity, and nestled inside that cavity was a heavy, olive-green metal box, the kind used for ammunition. It was cold to the touch. It wasn't locked. I lifted the two latches on the front, the metallic snap echoing in the silent workshop. I opened the lid. The first thing I saw was a thick, rectangular bundle wrapped in oilcloth and tied with twine. I lifted it out. It was heavy. My fingers fumbled with the knot, my heart hammering against my ribs. I finally got it undone and unfolded the cloth. Inside were stacks of cash. $100 bills, 50s, 20s, all bundled together with rubber bands. It wasn't millions, but it was more money than I had ever seen in my life. I didn't count it, not then, but it looked like a fortune. A life. A future. I stared at it, a wave of disbelief and a dizzying sense of relief washing over me. He had done it. He had found a way. This money was my escape. I could disappear. I could go anywhere, be anyone. I could get a small apartment, go to college, build a quiet, safe life, and never look back. Marcus Thorne would never know. I would be just another person who walked away from a worthless property. But there was something else in the box. Beneath where the money had been, there was another envelope. A smaller one, made of the same cream-colored paper as the letter. It was sealed with a drop of wax, and beside it, a small, leather-bound ledger. I picked up the envelope. It was addressed to me. I broke the seal. The note inside was short. Maya, this is your choice. The money is yours. Take it and run. Build a good life. Forget Northwood. Forget me. Forget all of this. Be safe and be happy. There is no shame in that choice. It is what I have wanted for you all along. That is one path. But there is another. The ledger in this box is a copy of the one your father made. It details every transaction, every threat, every crime Marcus Thorne committed to build his empire. There are names, dates, account numbers. It's the evidence your father died for. I have kept the original safe all these years. If you take this to the right people, it could be enough to finally bring him down, to get justice for your father, to save this town from the rot that has been eating at it for years. But I must warn you, this is not a safe path. Thorne is powerful. He has lawyers and judges and worse. He will fight you. He will try to destroy you. He will paint you as a liar, a fraud, a criminal yourself. It will be the hardest fight of your life. This workshop, this town, this legacy, it can be yours. You can stay and fight. You can use some of the money to fix this place, to make it your own, to build something here. Or you can take the money and go. Freedom or justice, a safe life or a meaningful one. I cannot make the choice for you. It must be yours. This is your true inheritance, my brave girl. Not the building or the money, but the choice. Whatever you decide, know that I am proud of you, and I love you more than words can say. Your loving grandfather, Thomas. I let the note fall from my fingers. The cash sat on the workbench, a silent, powerful promise of escape. The ledger sat in the box, a silent, damning promise of war, freedom or justice. He had laid my entire future out before me, in a dusty, condemned workshop at the end of a forgotten road. He had given me back my past, and now he was asking me what I wanted to do with my future. I looked around the workshop, at the tools, at the half-finished projects, at the picture of the smiling little girl. I looked at the money that could give her the life she never had. And I looked at the ledger that could avenge the father she never knew. The weight of his love and the weight of his legacy settled onto my 18-year-old shoulders, and I had no idea what to do. The choice laid out before me was so stark, so impossibly heavy, it felt paralyzing. On one side, a stack of cash that represented everything I had ever dreamed of: safety, anonymity, a clean slate. The chance to walk away from the files, the institutions, the constant feeling of being a burden on the world. I could go to a city where no one knew my name, get an apartment that was truly mine, and wake up every morning without a knot of fear in my stomach. I could be normal. The thought was so seductive, it was almost painful. It was a straight line to a life without shadows. On the other side was the ledger, a small, unassuming book that held the power to shatter a man's empire and bring justice for a father I never knew. But my grandfather's warning was clear. This path was not a straight line. It was a dark and twisted road filled with danger. Marcus Thorne, a man who murdered his own son to protect his secrets, would not hesitate to destroy a granddaughter he'd never met. He would use his money, his power, his influence to crush me. I would be trading the institutional battles I knew for a war against a monster. I spent the night in the workshop. I couldn't bear the thought of leaving, of going to a motel. This place, his place, felt like the only real thing in the world. I found an old canvas cot folded in a corner, shook the dust from it, and set it up near the workbench. I didn't touch the money again. I just left it sitting there, a silent testament to one possible future. I kept the lantern burning low, its warm light a small comfort against the profound darkness outside. The wind howled softly around the corners of the building, and the old wood groaned and settled, sounds that should have been frightening, but instead felt like the workshop was breathing around me. Sleep was impossible. My mind raced, playing out both scenarios. I saw myself on a beach somewhere, the sun on my face, the past a distant memory. I saw myself in a courtroom, a blur of cameras and angry faces, my life picked apart by strangers. I saw myself safe. I saw myself fighting. My grandfather had called me his brave girl, but I didn't feel brave. I felt terrified. I felt small. What could I, an 18-year-old with nothing but a duffel bag and a box of secrets, possibly do against a man like Marcus Thorne? The sensible choice was obvious. Take the money, disappear, live. It was what any rational person would do. It was the gift of a lifetime. But then I would look at the ledger. I would think of my father, a man I only knew from a single photograph, who had been brave enough to try and do the right thing and had paid for it with his life. I thought of my grandfather, who had lived for 2 decades in a prison of fear and silence to protect me and to protect that ledger. If I took the money and ran, what would their sacrifices have meant? They would have died and suffered for nothing. Their bravery would end with my cowardice. The safe life the money offered began to feel hollow, a beautiful, comfortable, empty shell. As the first hint of gray light began to filter through the grimy windows, a quiet resolve started to form in my heart. It wasn't a burst of courage. It was a slow, dawning realization. My grandfather hadn't just left me a choice. He had left me a home. This workshop, this legacy. He believed I was strong enough to carry it. He believed I was strong enough to fight. For my whole life, other people had made choices for me. Social workers, judges, foster parents, and even my grandfather in his own protective way. They had decided where I would live, what school I would go to, who I would be. This was the first real choice of my life. A choice that was entirely my own. And I realized I didn't want my first act as a free adult to be running away. I stood up from the cot, my body stiff from the cold and the hard surface. I walked over to the workbench. I picked up the ledger and held it in my hands. It felt solid. It felt real. Then I reached into the metal box and pulled out my grandfather's final, short note. Freedom or justice, a safe life or a meaningful one. He had trusted me to choose. And in that moment, I knew which one he had hoped I would pick. I found Mr. Davies's business card in the manila envelope where I had shoved it. I had to walk back into town to get a signal on my cheap phone. The diner was just opening, the smell of coffee and frying bacon spilling out into the cool morning air. I stood across the street, my heart pounding, and dialed the number. It was early, but it went to his direct line. He answered on the third ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Davies?" "Mr. Davies," I said, my own voice surprisingly steady. "It's Maya Sterling." There was a pause. "Maya? Is everything all right? Where are you?" "I'm in Northwood," I said. "I'm at the workshop." "Ah," he said, the single syllable loaded with pity. "I see. Have you decided what you want to do? I can have the relinquishment papers drawn up today." "No," I said, and the word felt powerful. It felt like a beginning. "That's not why I'm calling. I'm not relinquishing the property. I'm keeping it." Another pause, longer this time. "Maya, I have to advise you against that. The taxes, the condemnation order. It's a financial pit you can't afford." "I think I can manage," I said. I took a deep breath. "Mr. Davies, my grandfather, he left me some things, some information. I think it's about a man named Marcus Thorne." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. For a second, I thought he had hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice was completely different. The sleepy, formal lawyer was gone. He was wide awake now. He was sharp. "Maya," he said, his voice low and urgent, "do not talk to anyone else. Do not show anyone what you have." "Where are you right now?" "I'm on the main street in Northwood." "Go back to the workshop. Lock the door. Stay there. I'm getting in my car. I will be there in 3 hours." He hung up. I stood there for a moment, the phone in my hand, a thrill of fear and something that felt like triumph coursing through me. I had made my choice. The war had begun. I turned and walked back down River Road, not to a ruin, but to my home, to my command post. The work was just beginning. The 3 hours I waited for Mr. Davies were the longest of my life. I went back to the workshop and did as he said, locking the heavy door behind me. The space felt different now that I had made my choice. It was no longer a place of ghosts and grief. It was a place of purpose. My place. I walked through it, really seeing it for the first time. I saw the solid bones of the building, the strength in the thick wooden beams overhead. The roof sagged, yes, and the windows were broken, but it was built to last. It had been neglected, not ruined. I started to clean. It was a small, practical act, but it felt monumental. I found a broom and began to sweep away the years of accumulated dust and wood shavings, the motion rhythmic and meditative. With each stroke, I felt like I was clearing away not just the physical dirt, but the emotional debris of my own past. I was no longer a passive recipient of my fate. I was an active participant. I was taking control. I swept around the silent machines, under the workbenches, creating clean paths on the old wooden floor. I found a pile of rags and wiped down the workbench, carefully cleaning around my grandfather's glasses and the photo of me. I was not erasing him. I was making space for myself alongside him. When Mr. Davies arrived, he looked nothing like the stuffy lawyer I had met in the city. He was wearing jeans and a worn leather jacket, and his face was etched with a grim intensity. He carried a briefcase. I led him in, and he stood for a moment in the center of the room, his eyes taking everything in. "You've been busy," he observed, looking at the swept floors. "It needed doing," I said simply. "Maya," he said, turning to me, his gaze direct. "Before you show me anything, I need to be very clear. If what you have is what I think it is, your life is going to get very complicated and potentially very dangerous. Marcus Thorne is not a man to be trifled with. He has half the city's political establishment in his pocket. Once you start this, there is no going back. You have a chance, right now, to walk away. No one would blame you. It was the same choice my grandfather had given me, the same escape hatch." I looked at the clean workbench, at the photo of the smiling girl, at the solid iron of the table saw. "I'm not walking away," I said. My voice didn't waver. He studied my face for a long moment, then gave a single, sharp nod. "All right then, show me what you have." We sat at the workbench, and I laid it all out. The letter from my grandfather, the ledger. I told him about the money, which I had bundled back up and hidden in a more secure spot. He read the letter first, his expression unreadable. Then he opened the ledger. He spent nearly an hour poring over it, his finger tracing the lines of meticulous script. He was silent, his focus absolute. The only sound was the rustle of the pages. Finally, he closed the book and looked at me. There was a new light in his eyes, a spark of something that looked like righteous anger. "This is it," he said, his voice a low whisper. "This is the whole damn thing. Extortion, bribery, fraud, even a reference to the payment made to the cleanup crew the night your father died. Your grandfather wasn't just a carpenter, Maya. He was a bookkeeper. This is meticulous." "Is it enough?" I asked. "Enough?" He let out a short, sharp laugh that held no humor. "It's a nuke. But a nuke is useless if you can't get it to the target. The city police are a dead end. Thorne has too many friends there. We'd need to go federal. And we'll need more. We'll need to corroborate this. Find some of the people listed in here who are still alive and willing to talk." He looked around the workshop. "And we need to secure you. You can't stay here." "Yes, I can," I said, my jaw tightening. "This is my home now. This is where I'm making my stand." He started to argue, then stopped. He saw the look on my face. "Okay," he said slowly. "Okay, but we do this smart. First thing, we use some of that cash. We get a proper security system installed. We get the condemnation order challenged and lifted. We hire an engineer to assess the structure and get a crew in here to fix the roof and the wiring. We make this place legally and physically defensible. We turn his own weapon, the idea that this place is worthless, against him. No one will look for you in a condemned building that's suddenly being brought back to life. The plan was audacious. It was brilliant. It was exactly what my grandfather would have wanted. Using the money he'd hidden not to run, but to fortify. The months that followed were a blur of activity. Mr. Davies, he insisted I call him Robert now, was true to his word. He became my general, my strategist. He found a retired bulldog of an investigator named Sal, who took one look at the ledger and came on board immediately, his eyes gleaming. While Sal started tracking down the names in the ledger, Robert handled the bureaucracy. He filed motions with the county, paid the back taxes from the cash box, and hired a local contractor, a gruff but honest man named George, to start the repairs on the workshop. I stayed. I worked alongside George and his crew, learning how to patch a roof, run new wiring, and glaze a window. I poured my grief and my anger into the physical labor. With every nail I hammered, with every board I replaced, I felt stronger. I was not just rebuilding a workshop, I was rebuilding myself. I used the money my grandfather left me, sparingly, carefully, just as Robert advised. Enough to make the place livable and secure, but not enough to draw attention. The rest was our war chest. In the evenings, after the crew left, I would explore my grandfather's library. He had hundreds of books on woodworking, joinery, and design. I started reading them, and then I started practicing. I took a piece of scrap wood and one of his old chisels and tried to replicate the simple exercises in a beginner's book. My first attempts were clumsy, gouged messes. But I kept at it. I learned the feel of the wood, the weight of the tools. I found a deep, satisfying peace in the focus it required. I was connecting with him, with his passion, with the legacy that went beyond the fight for justice. I was learning his craft. The workshop slowly transformed. The roof no longer sagged. New windows let in bright, clear light. The old machines were cleaned, oiled, and humming back to life. It became a home, my home. One afternoon, Robert called. His voice was tense. "We got one," he said. "Sal found a former business owner, a man named Miller. Thorne bankrupted him 20 years ago. The ledger corroborates his story perfectly. He's terrified, but he's agreed to give a sworn deposition. This is our first real crack in the dam, Maya." A wave of cold fear and fierce hope washed over me. It was happening. We were moving from defense to offense. That night I couldn't work. I just stood in the middle of my workshop, the scent of fresh-cut pine in the air, and looked at the photo of my father. "We're doing it," I whispered to him. "We're going to get him." I thought about my cousins, Daniel and Claire, with their millions. I imagined their lives, filled with cars and houses and vacations. For a long time, the thought of them had filled me with a bitter, corrosive envy. But standing there, in the home I was building with my own two hands, preparing for a fight that meant something, I felt nothing but a strange, quiet pity for them. They had been given a fortune, but I had been given a purpose. I had been given a legacy, and I wouldn't have traded it for all the money in the world. The months turned into a year. The legal battle was a slow, grinding war of attrition, fought mostly by Robert and Sal in offices and courtrooms far from Northwood. They were building a case, piece by painstaking piece. More witnesses came forward, emboldened by the first. A former accountant of Thorne's, a subcontractor he'd ruined. Each one was a new brick in the wall of evidence we were building around him. Thorne's lawyers fought back, of course. They filed motions to dismiss. They tried to discredit the witnesses. They painted me in the press, which had started sniffing around the story, as a disgruntled, delusional girl trying to extort a respected businessman. But their attacks didn't touch me. Here in Northwood, I was insulated. I had my work. The workshop was no longer just a home. It was a functioning business. I had started small, making custom-built bookshelves for the diner, then a new counter for the hardware store. Word spread. People in the town and the surrounding areas started coming to me for custom furniture. They liked my work, the simple, honest craftsmanship I had learned from my grandfather's books. They liked the story too. The girl who had come back to reclaim her family's legacy. I wasn't an outsider anymore. I was the town's carpenter, Tom Sterling's granddaughter. I used the money from my work and a little more of the hidden cash to buy the lot next door, which had been vacant for years. I started planting a garden. I put down roots, literally and figuratively. I found a rhythm to my life, a peace I had never known. I would wake with the sun, work in the shop all day, the scent of cedar and cherry wood filling the air, and in the evenings, I would sit on my small porch, watch the stars come out over the river, and feel a sense of belonging that was so profound it sometimes brought me to tears. One day, a sleek black car I didn't recognize pulled up to the workshop. A man in an expensive suit got out. He was older, with silver hair and a face that was handsome in a cold, predatory way. I knew instantly who he was. Marcus Thorne. My heart hammered in my chest, but I didn't move from the doorway of my shop. I just stood there, my arms crossed, sawdust on my jeans. He walked towards me, his expensive shoes crunching on the gravel. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes scanning the restored workshop, the new windows, the solid roof. A flicker of something, annoyance, surprise, crossed his face. Maya Sterling, he said. His voice was smooth, like polished stone. You've done a lot with the place. I have to admit, I'm surprised. It's amazing what you can do with a little hard work, I said, my voice even. Indeed, he said, a thin smile playing on his lips. Listen, I think there's been a misunderstanding. You and I, we have no quarrel. You've been given some bad information, led astray by a lawyer looking for a payday. This crusade of yours, it's pointless, and it's beneath you. You're a talented girl. You have a future. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a checkbook. I own the development rights to most of the land around here. This little parcel of yours is a thorn in my side. I am prepared to make you a very generous offer, enough to set you up for life, anywhere you want to go. Name your price. It was the choice, all over again. The easy way out. The money. Offered by the very man who had murdered my father. He thought he could buy me. He thought everyone had a price. He looked at me, his eyes confident, waiting for me to name my number. I thought of my father. I thought of my grandfather's lonely vigil. I looked at my hands, calloused and strong from my work. I looked at the workshop, the home I had built from a ruin. I had everything I needed. This property is not for sale, I said. His smile vanished. His eyes turned to ice. Don't be a fool, girl. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I think I do, I said quietly, and I'm not the one who should be scared. Now get off my land. For a long second, he just stared at me, his mask of civility stripped away, revealing the pure, cold rage beneath. Then, without another word, he turned, got back in his car, and sped away, leaving a cloud of dust behind. I stood there, my body trembling with adrenaline, but my heart was calm. I had faced the monster, and I hadn't blinked. The fight wasn't over, but I knew in that moment that I was going to win. The end, when it came, was not a dramatic courtroom showdown. It was a quiet press conference on the steps of a federal courthouse. Robert stood at the podium, Sal beside him, and announced the indictment of Marcus Thorne and 5 of his associates on charges of racketeering, fraud, and conspiracy. The case against him was overwhelming. The ledger, backed by the sworn testimony of over a dozen witnesses, was irrefutable. Thorne's empire, built on fear and corruption, crumbled like a house of cards. He was arrested the same day. The news reports mentioned his connection to the unsolved death of an associate, Michael Sterling, 2 decades earlier. The case was being reopened. Justice, after a long and patient wait, had finally arrived. I watched it all on the small television in my workshop. I didn't go to the city. My part in the fight was over. As Robert spoke, I felt not a sense of triumph or revenge, but a quiet, profound sense of peace. The heavy weight I had been carrying, the weight of my father's and grandfather's legacy, finally lifted. I had done it. I had honored their sacrifice. I had chosen the meaningful life. Life in Northwood went on. The fall of Marcus Thorne meant some of his predatory development plans for the area stalled, giving the town a chance to breathe, to decide its own future. My business continued to grow. I hired a local kid as an apprentice, teaching him the way my grandfather had taught me, through patience and respect for the wood. The workshop was always filled with light and life and the hum of creation. It was more than a home or a business. It was a living monument to second chances. Sometimes I think about what my life would have been if I had taken the money and run. It would have been a good life, I suppose. A safe life. But it would have been a smaller life. It would have been a life lived in the shadow of a story that wasn't mine. By choosing to stay, to fight, to build, I had claimed my own story. I had learned that inheritance isn't something you are given, it's something you earn. It's not about the money or the property, it's about the values you choose to carry forward. My grandfather didn't leave me a fortune. He left me a compass. He showed me the way to myself. Home isn't a place you find, it's a place you make. You build it, board by board, choice by choice. Sometimes, you have to build it from the ruins of what came before. You have to be willing to see the potential in a condemned and broken down place, whether it's a building or your own life. You have to be brave enough to pick up the tools and start the work. My grandfather gave me a choice, and it was the hardest and best gift I have ever received. It taught me that the most valuable things in life are the ones that can't be bought or sold: courage, integrity, and purpose. What choices are you facing right now? What condemned workshop in your life is waiting for you to see its true value? Maybe it's a broken relationship, a failed career, a past you're ashamed of. But maybe, just maybe, it's also the foundation of your greatest strength. Share your story in the comments below. Tell me about the ruins you are rebuilding. I'll be reading them, because every story of resilience deserves to be heard, and every act of building a new life is an act of hope. If this story meant something to you, please subscribe and become part of this community. We're all just trying to find our way home, and it's a little easier when we walk that road together.
Okay, we've made a good couple of habitats here. Let's go to Pallet Town. Then I want to grab stuff to make the Ninetales habitat, if we can. That game wasn't worth it. Every time you had to pause to go to the bathroom, it would kick you out. Oh god. Honestly, I already play an MMO, and I've been playing it for like 12 years at this point, so I really don't need to add another one. My bestie and I find Palia to be one of the best cozy games they're making. It's still in beta form. Interesting. Made by a cozy gamer for cozy gamers. That is pretty convincing, Ellie. Beta, my butt. They're dropping a new update in a couple weeks. I mean, you can still drop updates and be in beta. Oh, what did you give us? What is that? Is that a stick? It's a stick. Would you visit Vera's Pocopia Islands one day? Yeah, sure. Why not? Do you want to move in here? Okay. I felt bad because Evie didn't really have a house. It's a true cozy MMORPG. Yeah, maybe I'll check it out. I'll check it out for you guys. Maybe I'll run a poll on the Discord and see what people think. Like I said, I have so many games that I play consistently, and then on top of that, I have games like this in rotation that I'm like trying to get through. It's like, who knows? What happened to playing Stardew? We played Stardew last night, Maze. That's also on rotation because we do Stardew and Pocopia like every other night. Okay, I don't think anybody moved in, right? I couldn't see you live. I was very confused.